Crescent moon sparkles. Welcome to bedtime, sleepy historian, where history drifts like sand across time. In this channel, the past is not told with urgency, but with calm, like the desert wind carrying whispers of forgotten footsteps. Here, you'll hear stories of armies that vanished beneath shifting dunes, of kings and wanderers whose names linger only as echoes, and of civilizations whose lives flickered like starlight across the vast sky. Each tale is written slowly, with warmth, poetry, and gentle detail, inviting you to lie back, close your eyes, and let the ancient world unfold around you. These are not battles shouted in noise, but memories spoken in a hushed tone, meant to soothe, relax, and lull you towards sleep while filling your dreams with the beauty of history. So if you've ever wondered what secrets the desert keeps, what ghosts still march beneath the sand, or what forgotten voices might still be speaking in the night, this is the place for you. Kindle subscribe, and let the gentle whisper of lost armies guide you into the quiet heart of history. The first grain of sand. The desert never forgets. That is what the old caravan leaders used to say, their faces wrapped in cloth and their eyes narrowed against the glare of the sun. A dune could rise and vanish within a season, but beneath it lay centuries of stories, pressed down like parchment in an endless library of sand. On the far edge of the Sahara, where the wind sighs like a voice that has grown weary from repeating itself, there were whispers of an army that had marched once and never returned. The Bedouins called them the silent host, not because they had fought and lost, but because they had simply disappeared, as though the desert itself had swallowed them whole. It was said they were Persians, men clad in bronze, shields glittering, banners snapping in the dry air. Their general, a stern figure with eyes like steel, had sought to conquer an oasis kingdom hidden in the sands. But instead, the sands conquered him. Centuries later, long after their bones had turned to dust and their swords dulled, the story still lingered. Travelers swore that on certain nights, when the wind moved just so, you could hear the echo of their march, the steady rhythm of sandals crunching against gravel, the low murmur of men speaking in tongues no longer heard, the clink of armor against armor. In the small village of Qasr al-Rimal, where mud-brick homes clung stubbornly to life against the barren horizon, a boy named Yusef grew up listening to these tales. He would sit cross-legged beside the elders, the stars wheeling above them, as one voice after another recited the legend of the lost army. His heart always stirred at the thought of it, thousands of men, swallowed not by battle, but by silence. Yusef was a dreamer in a place where dreams were as scarce as water. His father kept camels, his mother wove baskets, his uncles all worked the caravan routes. Life in Qasr al-Rimal was measured by survival. How much grain one had stored, how many goats had not wandered off, how full the clay jars of water remained. But Yusef's mind drifted elsewhere. He wondered if the lost soldiers still wandered, not in flesh, but in spirit, their shadows mingling with the desert winds. One evening, as the air cooled and the date palms whispered, Yusef asked his grandfather, "Do you think they are still out there walking? The lost army?" His grandfather, whose beard was as white as salt, lowered his gaze into the fire. "Perhaps," he said slowly. "But the desert is not kind. If it keeps them, it is because it wants them. And the desert does not return what it takes." The boy shivered, though the night was warm. That night, as he lay on the flat roof of his family's house, staring up at the scatter of stars, he thought he heard it, faint, so faint, the hush of sandals against stone, moving steadily across the sands. He closed his eyes and listened. And the desert whispered back. The caravan master's tale. The desert had a way of pulling people toward its mysteries. For most, it was only curiosity that flared and then faded, replaced by the practical matters of survival. But for Yusef, the whispers never left him. Each time the wind sighed across the dunes, he felt it pressing against his ears like a voice half-formed. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and painted the sands in copper and fire, a caravan stopped at Khazar al-Rimal. Their camels were draped in bells, their goods bundled in wool and leather, and the men carried the weary look of those who had walked farther than maps dared to show. Yusef slipped from his father's side and wandered among them, eager to catch pieces of their stories. The caravan master was a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, his eyes sharp as obsidian. He noticed the boys staring and gave a small smile. "Do you seek a tale, little hawk?" Yusef nodded shyly. "Tell me of the silent host." The master's smile faded, and he squatted low so their eyes met. "Ah, that story again." He glanced around, as though the very desert might be listening, then leaned closer. "I once crossed the western dunes. 3 days' march from the salt flats, I found something wrong. The air grew heavy, the sand darker. And there, half buried, I saw a spear. Bronze, not rusted, not broken, its tip sharp as the day it was forged." Yusef's breath caught. "Did you take it?" The master shook his head, his scar twisting with the movement. "No. Some treasures are not meant to be carried home. When I turned away, I swear I heard footsteps behind me. Not one pair, thousands. Yet the sands were empty." The boy's skin prickled. "What did you do?" "I left," the man said simply. "And I do not think the desert minded. But be warned, child, if you follow such whispers, the dunes may claim you as they claimed the host. Curiosity is a thirst the desert does not forgive." That night, Yusef lay awake again on the roof, his gaze fixed on the vast sky. He thought of the bronze spear, untouched by time, waiting beneath the sand. He thought of the sound of marching feet that no man could see. The longing inside him deepened, tugging like a rope at his chest. His grandfather's words came back to him: "The desert does not return what it takes." And yet Yusef wondered, what if it returned its secrets to those who listened closely enough? The desert wind stirred, soft but insistent, carrying with it a sound that seemed almost like breathing. Yusef made a silent vow to himself. One day, he would follow that whisper. One day, he would find the silent host. The call of the dunes. Days turned into weeks, yet the words of the caravan master would not leave Yusef's mind. He saw the spear in his dreams, its bronze tip gleaming in moonlight, half buried in endless waves of sand. Sometimes he heard voices in those dreams, deep, guttural, speaking a language that had not been spoken in centuries. When he woke, his chest would ache with longing, as if he had left something unfinished behind. His family noticed his distraction. His father scolded him for forgetting to tether the camels, and his mother clicked her tongue when she found a basket left half-woven. But Yusef could not explain the pull he felt. How could he say that the desert was calling him, whispering like a friend who had waited too long? One evening, his grandfather found him sitting alone by the well, staring into the black water as though it might reveal something. The old man lowered himself down beside him with a groan of tired bones. "Your thoughts are heavier than your years, boy. Tell me what burdens you." Yusef hesitated, then spoke. "I must see them. The silent host. I must hear with my own ears if they still walk." The old man's face grew grave. "You think the desert is a storyteller, giving its secrets for free? No, Yusef. It is a thief. It steals men, and women, and whole kingdoms, burying them so deep no prayer can reach them. Do not offer yourself to it." "But grandfather," Yusef whispered, "what if it has been waiting for me?" The old man studied him for a long time, his eyes glinting with both sadness and something like recognition. He reached into the folds of his robe and drew out a small object, a leather pouch, worn soft with age. "If you must walk that path," he said slowly, "take this. It was given to me by a Sufi wanderer long ago. Inside is salt from the Red Sea. Cast it in the sand when the air grows too heavy, and perhaps the desert will look away. Yusef held the pouch carefully, as though it might burn him. The weight of it in his palm was slight, yet it felt like a promise. That night, as the village settled into silence, Yusef climbed once more to the roof. He looked out at the vast, starlit sea of dunes, and for the first time, he did not only listen, he answered. "I am coming," he whispered into the night. And far out in the desert, carried by the restless wind, the sand shifted, as though something had stirred awake. Preparations and silence. When dawn arrived, the world of Khazar al-Rimal carried on as though nothing had changed. Goats bleated, women pounded grain, and the men checked the leather water skins before the heat swelled too high. But for Yusef, the morning felt different. The pouch of salt rested against his chest beneath his tunic, a hidden heartbeat that reminded him of the vow he had made. He began his preparations quietly, for he knew his parents would not allow him to leave. In the stillness of early morning, he walked among the palms and filled a small goatskin flask from the well, his eyes darting to ensure no one saw. He tucked a flat loaf of bread into a cloth bundle, along with a handful of dried dates. From the shed, he took a brass-handled knife, its edge dulled but serviceable, and wrapped it in leather to hide the theft. Every step felt like a betrayal, but the desert's whisper grew louder each night. Sometimes it seemed to murmur just behind his ear, urging him onward, promising that the silent host awaited. On the third night, as he tightened the knots on his bundle, he heard a voice. "Where will you go, boy?" Yusef froze. His sister, Layla, stood in the doorway, her dark hair unbound, her eyes glinting in the moonlight. She was younger than him by 2 years, but she carried herself with a sharpness that made her seem older. "Nowhere," he said quickly, but the lie cracked in his throat. Layla stepped closer, folding her arms. "You think I don't see? You are stealing food, hiding things. Tell me." He swallowed. "I am going to find them. The silent host." She stared at him for a long time, then let out a short, incredulous laugh. "The dead? You would chase the dead? They are not gone," Yusef insisted. "The desert keeps them. I hear them." Something in his voice softened her defiance. She tilted her head, studying him. "Then I will come." Yusef's chest tightened. "No, Layla. It is too dangerous. The desert does not return what it takes," she finished for him, rolling her eyes. "I have heard the same stories. But if it takes you, I will not sit here and wait. You are my brother. If you go, I go." He tried to argue, but the look on her face was unmovable. And so, in the quiet hours when the village slept and the stars wheeled overhead, 2 children slipped away with nothing but bread, water, and a whisper to guide them. As they crossed the first ridge of sand, Yusef paused and looked back. The village was already shrinking into the dark, a scatter of oil lamps glowing faintly like fireflies. He knew then that something inside him had ended, and something new had begun. The desert lay ahead, vast and endless. And somewhere within it, the silent host waited. The first march into silence. The desert greeted them not with fury, but with silence. At dawn the air was cool, the dunes stretched like sleeping beasts beneath the pale light, and the horizon shimmered with the promise of infinity. Yusef and Layla walked side by side, their small feet leaving prints that the wind quickly erased. It felt to Yusef as though the desert was testing them, watching, deciding whether they were worth its secrets. By midday, the sun rose merciless, and the heat wrapped around them like a heavy cloak. Their water flasks grew lighter, their lips cracked, and each step sank into sand that seemed to grow deeper with every stride. Layla said little, but when she did, it was sharp. "You did not tell me it would be this hard," she muttered, sweat beating at her temple. "You did not have to come," Yusef replied, though without anger. "I did," she said firmly, lifting her chin. "Someone must keep you from being swallowed by your foolish dreams." Yet when she stumbled, it was Yusef who caught her arm, steadying her. He realized then that the desert was no place for pride. They would have to carry each other, in spirit if not in strength. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the dunes, the air cooled, and the sky burned with stars so countless they seemed to fall closer with every heartbeat. They lit no fire. The desert itself glowed with pale light reflected off sand and stone. Layla curled against her bundle of cloth, exhausted. Yusef, however, remained awake. And then he heard it. At first, he thought it was the sigh of the wind, but no, this was different. It was a rhythm. A cadence. Like hundreds of feet moving in unison. Soft, steady, just beyond the edge of hearing. His heart pounded. He rose slowly, careful not to wake Layla, and strained his ears. Yes, there it was again. The faint clang of metal, the murmur of voices speaking words he could not understand. His mouth went dry. Yusef pressed a hand to the pouch of salt hanging against his chest. The air around him had grown heavy, as though the desert itself was holding its breath. From the crest of the nearest dune, a shape flickered, just for a heartbeat. A figure, tall and armored, carrying a spear that caught the starlight. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it dissolved into sand. Yusef's breath came fast, his pulse roaring in his ears. He wanted to wake Layla, to show her, but something in the weight of the night told him not to. Instead, he sat in silence, staring at the place where the figure had stood. And when the whisper of marching faded, he realized that he was smiling, not with joy, but with the terrible certainty that he was no longer chasing a story. The silent host was real. And they were waiting. The mirage of spears. The next morning, Yusef's eyes were hollow from lack of sleep, but he said nothing to Layla. She noticed, of course, she always noticed, but instead of questioning him, she pressed the last of the flat bread into his hand and forced him to eat. They walked in silence, their shadows long and thin against the rising dunes. By midday the heat returned with a vengeance. The air shimmered like glass, bending the horizon into waves. Layla stopped suddenly, squinting ahead. "Yusef," she whispered. "Do you see it?" He followed her gaze. There, in the distance, stood an oasis, a cluster of palms, a pool of water glimmering with light, and even the faint sound of voices, laughter carried on the wind. Yusef's mouth went dry. His tongue ached for water. For a moment, he thought of running toward it, of plunging into that coolness. But then he remembered the caravan master's words, and the figure he had seen the night before. "It's a trick," he said hoarsely, catching Layla's wrist before she could step forward. Her brow furrowed. "How do you know?" "Because the desert does not give so easily." Layla hesitated, then nodded. Together they stood, watching the oasis shimmer and ripple as though made of smoke. And then, just as suddenly, it changed. The water darkened, the palms shriveled, and what had looked like laughter became the echo of distant shouting. Yusef's chest tightened. For within that wavering image he saw them, a line of men, helmets gleaming, their spears raised in formation. The army moved forward as though caught in a moment of endless march, their faces blurred but their presence undeniable. Layla gasped. "Do you see them too?" "Yes," Yusef whispered. His heart thundered in his chest. "They are not only whispers. They are here." The mirage trembled, then broke apart into heat waves and empty sand. The silence that followed was heavier than before, as though the desert had closed its hand over a secret it was unwilling to share too soon. Layla clutched his arm. "Brother, we should turn back." But Yusef could not. The certainty within him had hardened. He had seen them, not in a dream, not in a tale, but with his own eyes. The silent host walked still, bound to this desert. And he had to know why. "We can't," he said softly, shaking his head. "We're already walking with them." Layla stared at him, her lips pressed tight, but she said nothing more. Together they moved on, their footprints trailing behind them like fragile promises. Above them, a hawk circled once, twice, and then vanished into the blinding sky. The relic in the sand. The following day dawned with a strange stillness. Even the wind seemed to hold back, as though it did not wish to disturb what lay ahead. Yusef and Layla trudged onward, their feet sinking into dunes that rolled endlessly, each crest revealing only another horizon of gold. Their flasks were nearly empty, and their bread reduced to crumbs. By midday, Layla stopped and pointed. "There," she said, her voice hushed. Half buried in the sand was a curve of metal, glinting beneath the sun. At first Yusef thought it was a trick of light, another cruel mirage. But as they drew closer, the object sharpened into form, a shield, weathered but whole, its surface etched with strange markings. The sand had polished it smooth over centuries, but the outline of a lion's head could still be seen, jaws open in eternal roar. Yusef fell to his knees before it. His hand trembled as he brushed the sand away. The metal was cool, impossibly cool, as though untouched by the sun. Layla crouched beside him, her eyes wide. "This cannot be," she whispered. "If it belonged to them, it should have rusted away long ago." Yusef shook his head. "The desert keeps what it wants. It hides it, guards it." His chest throbbed with wonder. "This is proof, Layla. They were real. They are still here." As if to answer, the air around them thickened. The horizon seemed to ripple. Yusef thought he heard the faint creak of leather straps, the distant rattle of armor. The silence pressed close, heavy, until Layla clutched his arm. "Do you hear it too?" she whispered. He nodded, his mouth too dry to speak. Then, in the shifting sands beyond, shadows flickered, rows of men marching. For a heartbeat, Yusef saw their faces, stern, unyielding, eyes fixed ahead as though bound to an endless duty. And then, like smoke, they were gone. The shield lay between the siblings, gleaming faintly in the sun. Layla drew back. "We should leave it," she said firmly. "Do not anger them." But Yusef could not pull his gaze away. He reached out, fingers brushing the lion's face. A shiver ran through him, as though something had passed from the shield into his skin. For a moment he thought he heard a voice, not in words, but in a low hum that vibrated within his bones. He withdrew his hand quickly, his chest heaving. The desert seemed to sigh, as if amused. They left the shield behind, half buried once more. But as they walked away, Yusef felt the weight of unseen eyes on his back. The silent host was watching. The night march. That night the desert was brighter than usual. The moon rose fat and pale, casting silver light across the dunes until every ridge glowed like bone. Yusef and Layla sat huddled together, their cloaks drawn tight, the little bundle of food now nearly gone. The shield they had left behind haunted them both, though neither dared speak of it. Layla was the first to break the silence. "If the desert keeps them, why did it show us that shield?" Yusef stared at the horizon, where the sand met the sky in an endless sweep. "Perhaps it wanted us to know they were real. Perhaps it wanted us to follow." She frowned, pulling her knees to her chest. "Or perhaps it wanted to remind us that nothing comes back whole." The wind stirred, carrying with it a faint sound, so faint Yusef wondered if he imagined it. A rhythm. Sand shifted as though pressed beneath countless feet. He held his breath, listening. "Do you hear it?" he whispered. Layla lifted her head. Her eyes widened. Yes. From beyond the nearest rise of sand, shadows appeared. Not mirages this time, but darker shapes that moved with purpose. An entire line of men, their armor glinting faintly under the moonlight, their spears raised in a forest of metal. The earth seemed to thrum beneath their steps, though when Yusef pressed his hand to the sand, it lay still. The siblings crouched low, scarcely breathing. The host marched in silence, yet the sound of their presence filled the air, a hum, a weight, as if the desert itself had taken on their memory and replayed it. Yusef's eyes fixed on one figure near the front. Taller than the rest, helmet crowned with a plume, his posture rigid with command. Even though the features of his face were blurred, Yusef felt his gaze, direct, piercing, as though it sought him through centuries. The host advanced across the dunes, endless in number, and then, without warning, vanished. The moonlight fell on empty sand. Layla's nails dug into Yusef's arm. "We should go back," she said hoarsely. "This is not meant for us." But Yusef shook his head, trembling. "No, Layla. This is why we came. They are not gone. They walk still. And I must know where they march." The desert lay silent again, as if pleased with their fear. Above them, the stars burned cold and indifferent, while somewhere beneath the sand, the footsteps of the silent host echoed on. Traces beneath the dunes. The morning after the march, neither Yusef nor Layla spoke of what they had seen. Words felt clumsy in the face of such silence, and each feared that speaking might invite the host closer. Instead, they walked, their shadows long on the sand, their steps careful and deliberate. By midday, the desert gave them a sign. Half hidden beneath a slope of sand lay the remains of something fragile. At first, Yusef thought it was driftwood, though how could wood find its way here? But when he brushed the grains away, he uncovered a shard of bone. Long, curved, pale as ivory. Layla knelt beside him, her eyes wide. "Is it?" He nodded slowly. "A rib. Human." They dug with their hands, uncovering more, fragments of a jawbone, the faint outline of teeth still clinging. The sand yielded reluctantly, as though it resented their intrusion. Yet what it revealed was unmistakable. A soldier, long buried, his remains curled upon themselves like a sleeper disturbed. And beside him, astonishingly preserved, lay a strip of cloth, deep crimson, its weave still visible, though frayed. Yusef lifted it with trembling fingers. The fabric did not crumble. It shimmered faintly, almost as though the desert had woven its silence into the fibers. Layla drew back, her face pale. "Brother, leave it! Please!" But Yusef's eyes burned with awe. This was their banner. Or their cloak. "Do you see? The desert keeps them, but it does not let them fade." As he held the cloth, the air thickened. The heat pressed against them, heavy, suffocating. Layla clutched her necklace of palm beads, whispering a prayer under her breath. And in that stifling stillness, Yusef heard it again, the faint clang of metal, the murmur of voices carried on a windless air. He dropped the cloth. The sound stopped. The air lightened. They buried the bones once more, covering them gently with sand. Layla's hands trembled as she worked, and when she finished, she whispered, "Rest." Yusef could not help but glance back as they walked away. The crimson fabric still peeked from beneath the sand, as if the desert wanted him to remember. For the rest of that day, either of them felt alone. Shadows clung at the edge of their vision, and when the wind rose, it seemed to carry the low chant of men marching towards some unseen destiny. By nightfall, Layla turned to him, her voice firm despite her fear. "If we go any further, there may be no return." Yusef met her gaze. His chest was tight, but his voice was steady. "I know." And he did not stop walking. The storm of ashen sand. The desert often shifted its moods without warning, and on the 10th day of their wandering, it chose fury. The morning began still enough, the sky a washed-out blue, the dunes soft underfoot. But by midday, the horizon darkened with a strange haze, a wall of dust rising where there should have been nothing. The air grew sharp, biting at their throats, and Layla gripped Yusef's sleeve. "A storm," she said. Her voice was tight with fear. They scrambled to the hollow of a dune, pulling their cloaks over their heads just as the storm fell upon them. The world vanished. Sand struck like knives, filling their mouths, their ears, their lungs. The air was alive with a shrieking howl, and for a time, Yusef thought they would be buried, consumed like the host before them. But amid that chaos, shapes appeared. The sandstorm thinned into strange corridors, tunnels of moving dust. Through them, Yusef glimpsed men walking, armored, faces hidden, spears braced against an endless wind. Their forms wavered like shadows caught between life and death, moving with grim determination. Layla clutched his arm, her nails digging through the cloth. "Tell me you see them too." "I see," Yusef whispered, his heart hammering. The storm roared, tearing at their skin, but the figures within it marched undisturbed, as though the storm belonged to them. For a brief, harrowing moment, Yusef thought the line of soldiers would break through the veil of sand and sweep them away. The tall figure at the head, the general with the plume, turned his blurred face toward Yusef. Even through the storm, Yusef felt the weight of that gaze, a recognition that chilled his blood. Then the wind shifted. The wall of dust collapsed, and the army vanished once more into silence. When the storm finally passed, the desert was transformed. The dunes had shifted into new shapes, their ridges raw and sharp. Half buried in the sand lay the remains of objects long hidden, broken spears, dented helmets, the splintered wood of what might once have been a war chariot. The ground seemed littered with fragments of memory, shaken loose by the storm. Yusef and Layla staggered among them, awestruck. Layla bent to touch a helmet, but pulled back quickly. It was freezing, though it had lain under a sun that burned the skin. The desert had shown them more than whispers now. It had given them relics, pieces of the silent host torn from their burial. And Yusef, though trembling, felt a terrible certainty. They were no longer searching for the army. The army was searching for them. The soldier who did not fade. They moved carefully among the storm's offerings, their feet crunching on shards of wood and twisted bronze. The air was eerily still, as though the desert had exhausted itself in its fury and now waited, watching. Layla crouched near a half-buried spear. The wood was splintered, but the bronze head shone sharp as the day it had been forged. She reached for it, then hesitated. "It feels wrong to touch," she murmured. Yusef swallowed hard, his own hands itching with the same urge. The relics felt alive, echoes with breath still caught inside. But before he could answer, a sound broke the stillness. A footstep. Not the crunch of sand beneath their own feet, but heavier. Deliberate. Yusef froze, his heart seizing. Slowly he turned. There, at the crest of a dune, stood a soldier. He was no mirage. His armor gleamed pale under the moonlight, his spear steady in his hand. His face was obscured by a helm, but Yusef could feel the weight of his stare, locked directly upon them. The soldier did not waver, did not blur like the shadows before. He was solid, real, yet impossibly ancient. Layla gasped and stumbled back, clutching Yusef's arm. "He sees us." Yusef's throat was dry. "Don't move." The soldier began to descend the dune, each step slow, measured. Sand whispered around his greaves, but his movements made no sound beyond that. He stopped only a few paces away, the tip of his spear gleaming faintly. For a long moment, none of them moved. The desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, In a voice like stone grinding against stone, the soldier spoke. The words were foreign, harsh, yet Yusef felt them more than heard them. They pressed into his chest, heavy with command. Layla clung tighter to him. What did he say? I don't know. But deep inside, Yusef thought he understood. The soldier was not asking, nor warning. He was summoning. The soldier raised his spear, not in threat but in signal. And from the shadows beyond the dunes, more figures began to appear, rows upon rows of soldiers, their armor glinting like stars against the sand. Layla's breath broke into a sob. Yusef, we have to run. But Yusef could not move. His legs trembled, yet his eyes were locked on the soldier before him. In that faceless helm, he saw not hostility, but expectation. As though the host had been waiting for him. The soldier lowered his spear, stabbing it into the sand. The sound was sharp, final. Then, as the others gathered behind him, the desert wind rose once more, swallowing them in a blur of dust and shadow. When it cleared, the army was gone. Only the spear remained, standing upright in the sand before Yusef's feet. He knew then, the silent host had chosen him. The summons of the sand. Yusef stared at the spear as though it were alive. It stood impossibly straight in the shifting sand, unclaimed yet unmovable, like a marker driven into the very bones of the desert. The bronze tip glimmered faintly, though no torch or moonbeam touched it now. Layla tugged his arm. Yusef, we should go. Please, before it comes back. Her voice cracked, the last word dissolving into the silence. But Yusef could not turn away. His breath came shallow, every nerve pulled toward the weapon before him. He felt the same pull one might feel standing on the edge of a cliff, fear mingled with a strange, terrible longing to lean forward. They left it for me, he whispered, his own words trembling in the dry air. Layla shook her head sharply. No. It's a curse, Yusef. They want to drag us down into their grave. Don't touch it. But her plea was already too late. Yusef stepped forward, slow as though caught in a dream. He reached out, fingers brushing the shaft. A sound struck his ears, a deep, low resonance that was not wind, nor voice, nor music. It was like the desert itself humming, a note buried so low it made his bones tremble. The spear was warm under his palm, not with heat, but with life. And then the world shifted. The dunes stretched, blurred, and for the briefest moment Yusef stood not in the present but in another age. Around him rose the outlines of a vast army, banners snapping in a wind that was not there, drums echoing across the sand. The air was heavy with sweat and dust and the metallic tang of waiting battle. Faces turned toward him, not ghostly now, but whole and vivid, every eye alive with expectation. He saw the soldier again, the one with the faceless helm. This time, the man lifted his spear in salute. The vision dissolved as suddenly as it came. Yusef staggered back, breath ragged, the desert once more empty save for Layla's frightened gaze. What did you see? She whispered, gripping his arm. An army, Yusef said hoarsely. An army that knows me. Layla stared at him, wide-eyed and pale. You can't mean to follow them. But Yusef's hand still clutched the spear, and though his heart was a storm of fear, another current ran beneath it, a pull older and stronger than himself. The desert had whispered to him since childhood, in dreams and waking silences. Now it had spoken aloud. They want me to come, he said, voice breaking with awe. They've been waiting. Layla's tears glimmered in the starlight. And if they never let you come back? Yusef looked into the dunes, into the endless shadows where the host had vanished. The wind rose again, carrying a faint murmur like distant marching feet. He tightened his grip on the spear, and though he did not answer, his silence said everything. The summons had been given. And Yusef knew he could not refuse. The first steps toward the vanished. The night deepened, the stars burning low as though the heavens themselves held their breath. Layla clutched Yusef's sleeve, her fingers trembling. "Don't do this," she pleaded. "You saw what they are, not men, not even shadows. They are hunger. They'll take you into the sand and I'll never see you again." But Yusef stood still, the spear balanced in his hand with unsettling ease, as though it had always been his. The desert around him hummed faintly, a vibration beneath his feet, as if the dunes themselves were alive. "I can't turn back," he murmured. "I've carried this in my dreams for too long. Every night I saw them, marching, calling. I thought it was madness. Now I know it was memory." "Memory?" Layla's voice cracked with fear and disbelief. "Yusef, you're a shepherd's son, not a soldier. You've never marched to war." But Yusef did not answer. His gaze swept the horizon where the dunes curved like frozen waves. For the first time in his life, the desert did not seem empty. It pulsed with unseen order, paths carved in silence, destinies folded into the grains of sand. He began to walk. Layla stumbled after him, desperate. "At least wait until dawn. Don't follow them blind in the dark." Yet the stars gave enough light, and Yusef walked as if he knew each rise and hollow already. His sandals pressed into places where no footprints remained, yet his steps felt guided, sure, as though his feet were retracing paths worn long ago. The further they went, the colder the air became. A strange stillness fell. The wind ceased, the dunes no longer shifted. Even the stars above seemed fixed and watchful. It was as though they had stepped out of time. Then, at the crest of a dune, Yusef froze. Below lay a hollow where the sand was strangely sunken, as if something vast lay buried beneath. The surface glimmered faintly in the starlight, not like grains of sand but like stone, carved and eroded. Layla gasped. "What is that?" Yusef's throat tightened. He knew, though he could not explain how. "Their camp?" he whispered. "Or what's left of it?" They descended carefully, the sand soft and treacherous. As they drew closer, the shapes revealed themselves, fragments of broken shields half buried, rusted spearheads protruding like bones, a shattered chariot wheel. And scattered among them, shapes of men, not alive, not skeletal, but lying half-merged in the sand as if it had risen up to swallow them mid-step. Their faces were blurred, features smoothed by centuries, yet their armor still clung faintly to their forms. Layla pressed a hand over her mouth, trembling. "Yusef, they're still here." A whisper stirred, faint as a sigh, weaving through the stillness. It was not wind, not voice, but a collective exhale that brushed their ears. The buried host was not gone. It was waiting. Yusef gripped the spear tighter, his pulse thundering. He felt no malice in the whisper, only endless patience. "They want me to march with them," he said, his voice heavy with awe and dread. Layla's eyes brimmed with tears. "And if you do, Yusef, will you ever return?" The desert gave no answer. Only the buried army breathed, silent in its vigil, as the stars wheeled overhead. The breathing of the sand. Yusef stood at the edge of the hollow, his toes gripping the sloping sand, staring at the strange valley where men had become half stone, half memory. The buried soldiers seemed to shift faintly, not by movement but by suggestion, like mirages that flicker in the heat. Their shields gleamed faintly in the starlight, though dulled with age. Layla's breath came quick and uneven. "We shouldn't be here. These are not graves, Yusef. This is a prison." But Yusef shook his head. "No. They're waiting." His voice carried a weight she had never heard before, something ancient, as though he were not merely speaking his own thoughts but recalling words whispered to him long ago. The desert itself seemed to exhale. Sand slid gently down the sides of the hollow, a soft hiss filling the air. Layla clutched her scarf tighter around her face, trembling. For a moment, she thought the whole ground was breathing, rising and falling with an invisible chest. Then, from beneath their feet, a low vibration thrummed. Not violent but steady, like the beat of a war drum buried deep in the earth. Yusef's eyes widened. He felt the rhythm echo through his bones, syncing with his pulse. "They march still," he whispered. "Even here. Even now." Layla grabbed his arm, shaking him. "You're not one of them. You're alive, Yusef. You belong with the living." He turned toward her slowly, his expression unreadable. "Do I?" His grip tightened on the spear, its weight too natural, too right in his hand. "What if I was meant to be here all along? What if I've always been walking toward this place?" Layla's eyes filled with tears. "No. You've been walking with me. With your family. With your flocks. With the sun and the seasons. This is a trap made of dust and sorrow. Don't let it take you." The vibration deepened. Around them, the shapes in the sand began to shift. A buried soldier's hand twitched, grains sliding from its fingers. A helmet tilted as though a head had turned beneath it. The whisper rose again, no longer faint but layered, countless voices overlapping, unintelligible yet heavy with command. Yusef's breath quickened. His body leaned forward, drawn toward the hollow as though his very soul were tethered. His eyes glowed faintly in the starlight, not with fire but with reflection, mirroring the strange shimmer of the buried host. Layla cried out and seized his other hand, pulling with all her strength. "Yusef! Look at me, not at them! You belong to the world above, not beneath this cursed sand." For a heartbeat, Yusef's gaze flicked to hers, wavering between her tear-streaked face and the beckoning hollow. His chest heaved. He stood on the knife's edge of choice, his heart divided between love and destiny, between the whisper of the living and the command of the lost. The desert waited, silent except for the restless breathing of the sand. The choice in the hollow. Yusef stood trembling, one foot already sinking into the slope that led down toward the half-buried legion. The spear in his hand pulsed faintly, not with light but with something subtler, a rhythm that echoed the great vibration under the sand. It was as if the weapon itself remembered every hand that had held it, every command shouted above its blade. Layla clung to him, her arms tight around his wrist, her voice breaking. "You are not theirs. You are mine. You are your mother's. You are your father's. You are the boy who used to climb the acacia trees and laugh when the fruit fell on your head." Her words cut through the layered whispers. For a breath, the desert fell still, as if the dead themselves leaned closer to hear. But then the hollow answered. A helmet rolled with a dry clatter, and a skull half hidden beneath sand turned, empty sockets catching the starlight. The chorus of whispers surged again, more insistent, more commanding. They were not words, yet Yusef understood them. Stand. Rise. March. His knees buckled. He could feel the weight of their call pressing down on his shoulders, bowing his spine, pulling him toward them. His hand lifted the spear without his bidding, the way a man lifts his arm when sworn into service. "No!" Layla shouted. With sudden force, she tore the scarf from her face and pressed her lips to his, fierce and desperate. The kiss was not soft, it was full of salt and sand, a plea dragged out of the depths of her soul. For a moment, the desert's whispers faltered. The breathing of the sand seemed to catch, as though the whole earth had paused. Yusef staggered, the spear shaking in his hand. The vibration in the ground shifted, breaking rhythm. His chest heaved as he tore his mouth away from hers. "I hear them," he gasped. "But I hear you too." Layla cupped his face with both hands, her eyes wet, her voice trembling. "Then choose, Yusef. Choose with your heart, not with their dust. He looked past her, down into the hollow where thousands of silent warriors seemed on the cusp of rising. Their armor glimmered faintly like stars half buried in sand, waiting to be reborn. He could almost see himself among them, eternal, part of something vast and unending. But then he looked into Layla's face, her fear, her love, her fierce will to keep him in the world of the living. And suddenly, the spear in his hand felt heavier, less like destiny and more like a chain. With a cry that tore from his chest, Yusef hurled the weapon into the hollow. It spun end over end, vanishing into the shifting sand. The whispers rose sharply, then broke apart like smoke in the wind. The vibration ceased. The desert was still again. Yusef collapsed to his knees, gasping. Layla fell beside him, holding him tightly as though anchoring him to the earth. The stars above shimmered brighter, or perhaps their eyes were clearer now that the weight of the host had withdrawn. Down in the hollow, the helmets and bones lay motionless once more. Silent. Waiting. But Yusef knew they were not gone. Only sleeping. The stillness after the cry. For a long time they did not move. Yusef's cheek pressed against the sand, his breast shallow, his body trembling as if every nerve had been wrung dry. Layla held him, her hands sliding over his hair, whispering words of comfort though she was not certain he could hear. The desert had fallen into a silence so complete that even the usual night creatures, the skittering beetles, the far-off cries of jackals, seemed to have withdrawn. Finally, Yusef pushed himself up on his elbows. His face was pale, lips cracked, eyes wide but no longer unfocused. He glanced toward the hollow. It lay as it had before, a shallow depression in the sand dotted with shards of bone and rusted metal. Nothing stirred. No breath of wind. No voice beneath the dunes. "They are watching," he whispered, his voice raw. Layla followed his gaze but saw nothing except the starlight pooling in the curve of the earth. "Then let them watch. You are not theirs." Yusef shook his head, rubbing his hands together, as though trying to scrub away a residue. "I cast their spear away, but I felt it. It did not vanish. It sank. It waits, Layla. They wait. I have only refused them for now." Her arms wrapped around his shoulders, fierce. "Then we leave this place before the waiting ends." But the desert was not finished with them. As they rose, a gust of wind came from nowhere, sudden and sharp, swirling sand around their legs. It carried no words, but the weight of it pressed against them as if the unseen host exhaled in disappointment. The hollow seemed to darken, the edges shifting like something turning beneath the dunes. Yusef grabbed Layla's hand. "Do not look back," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. They climbed the ridge, step after grueling step, sand sliding beneath their feet. Behind them the hollow yawned, but they refused to turn their heads. Each grain of sand seemed to pull them downward, but Layla leaned into Yusef, and Yusef leaned into her, and together they fought gravity until at last the ridge flattened. On the other side stretched the endless expanse of desert. Pale under the starlight, vast and merciless, but also empty in a way that felt almost merciful. Yusef sank onto his knees once more, his chest heaving, sweat glistening on his brow. Layla crouched beside him, pressing her forehead to his shoulder. For the first time since the voices began, the silence did not feel oppressive. It felt like relief. But still, Yusef did not smile. His eyes lingered on the horizon, his thoughts heavy. "They will rise again," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "If not for me, then for another who stumbles too close. The desert does not forget." Layla kissed his temple gently. "Then let the desert keep its secrets. We will not give them ours." Yet in the quiet that followed, Yusef could not shake the feeling that the host had not only seen him, but marked him. and though he had chosen to remain in the world of the living, he feared that one day the call would return, soft, patient, and inescapable as the sands themselves. The mirage of salvation. By dawn, their bodies ached as if every bone had been hammered upon an anvil. The desert sun rose, harsh and unsparing, yet its heat felt almost preferable to the cold whispers of the night before. Yusef's steps were unsteady, but he refused to let his hands slip from Layla's. She walked beside him, her veil pulled tight across her face, eyes narrowed against the glare. Hours stretched. The horizon wavered with mirages, cities of glass, rivers glistening like spilled silver, trees heavy with fruit that vanished when approached. Layla tried not to look at them, but Yusef stared each time, half afraid and half longing. At last, one shimmer did not disappear. A line of green smudged the horizon, too still, too precise to be an illusion. As they neared, the faint shape of palms became visible, their fronds swaying gently. Beneath them, the sheen of water glimmered. Layla gripped Yusef's arm, her heart quickening. An oasis. But Yusef frowned. Or a trick. His voice was hoarse. I no longer trust what the desert offers. Still, thirst clawed at their throats, and their lips split with dryness. The air smelled faintly of wet earth, real and undeniable. Layla pulled him forward. If it is a trick, then let it be our last. If it is real, we live. They stumbled into the grove by midday. The shade was cool, thick with the rustle of palm leaves. Pools of water shimmered between the trees, ringed by reeds, dragonflies darting over their surface. The sight nearly undid them. Layla fell to her knees, cupping water into her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yusef drank as well, though his eyes never left the horizon, as though expecting the sand to rise and devour it all. When he finally sat back, wetness dripping from his beard, his chest heaved not only with relief but with unease. It is too quiet. Even oases have birds. Layla listened. The hush pressed heavy against her ears. Only the whisper of palms, only the murmur of water. No sparrows, no doves, no cries of cranes overhead. Before she could answer, a voice drifted across the grove. Not the spectral chant of the night, but a man's voice, ragged yet alive. Travelers! They turned sharply. A figure emerged from behind the palms, a gaunt man, sun-browned, clothes tattered, his eyes hollow as though he had walked through years rather than miles. He carried no weapon, only a staff, and leaned heavily upon it. Layla's breath caught. You, who are you? The man stared at them as though uncertain they were real. His lips cracked into a trembling smile. The desert did not take you either. His words hung in the oasis like a shadow. Yusef rose slowly, his hand slipping toward the knife at his belt. What do you mean? The man's smile faltered, and in his eyes glimmered a sorrow that seemed older than the palms themselves. I have heard them too, he said softly. The armies beneath the sand. And I have waited here, between thirst and madness, for others who escaped their call. The keeper of the oasis. The man sank down beside the pool, lowering his staff until it rested across his knees. His movements were slow, deliberate, as though he had repeated them countless times. The water rippled with his reflection, drawn face, hollow cheeks, a beard streaked with white. My name is Farid, he said, voice hushed, though names matter little now. I came here many seasons ago. A caravan passed through, merchants from the west. The desert swallowed them whole. I alone reached this place. Layla leaned forward. You have lived here, alone? Farid's smile was thin, brittle. Alone, but not without company. At night the host comes. You have heard them, I know it. Their voices gather in the dunes, calling for the living to join their march. Each man thinks himself strong enough to resist, until his feet move of their own accord and his body becomes another whisper on the wind. Yusef's hand clenched around his knife. You stayed. Why not flee this cursed place? Farid looked up at him, eyes dark with exhaustion. Because there is no fleeing. The desert spreads on every side. I walked for days once, believing I had found a path. But each morning I woke again beneath these palms. The oasis binds me. Perhaps it is mercy, perhaps punishment. I no longer ask. The silence that followed was heavy. Layla shivered despite the heat. She glanced at the water, its surface calm as glass, yet somehow it felt like a mirror reflecting not only their faces but the weight of all who had come before. Farid's voice dropped lower, a secret carried on the shade. You must not wander when darkness falls. The host grows strongest then. I have seen men walk smiling into the dunes, believing they follow their mothers, their children, their gods. They do not return. Layla pressed her fingers to her lips. But why us? Why do they call? Farid's gaze moved from her to Yusef, lingering as though reading something written upon them. Because you still carry hope. That is the sweetest food for the lost. Yusef bristled. Then we will leave at first light, before they rise again. Farid gave a soft laugh, dry as the wind. So I once said. And still I am here. His hand brushed the sand at his feet. You may try, travelers. You may fight them with every breath. But the desert remembers more than men do, and it keeps what it claims. The sun lowered, shadows lengthening across the grove. Layla felt the weight of the coming night settle upon her shoulders. The palms whispered in the wind, and though no voice yet rose from the dunes, she could already hear the promise of marching feet waiting beyond the horizon. Farid raised his staff, as if in ritual. When they come, he murmured, you must close your ears. Do not listen to their names, nor their pleas. For the moment you believe them, you are lost. Layla's fingers found Yusef's hand, clutching hard. For the first time, she felt not only the desert's hunger, but also its patience, an endless persistence that could wait centuries for the living to stumble into its arms. And the night was coming. The night of the host. The desert exhaled as the sun slipped beneath the horizon. Heat bled away, leaving a brittle chill that crept into their bones. The palms stood still as if holding their breath, and the oasis water reflected a sliver of moonlight, pale and trembling. Farid had drawn a rough circle in the sand around their resting place, muttering words Layla could not understand. His staff lay across his knees, and he sat rigid, eyes fixed on the dark dunes beyond the grove. Stay within the circle, he said, voice firm. No matter what you see. No matter who calls your name. Layla sat pressed against Yusef, her heart restless. Do you hear them yet? She whispered. Not yet, he murmured, though his jaw was tight. His hand rested on his knife, though what used steel was against voices he did not know. The first sound came like the sigh of distant wind. Then it thickened, footsteps, countless footsteps dragging through the sand. The horizon trembled with movement, though no figures were seen. Only the rhythm of an army, steady and unbroken, marching through eternity. Layla clutched Yusef's arm. They're here. And then came the voices. They rose from every direction, surrounding the grove. Some were sharp, like the barked commands of officers. Others soft, tender, like mothers calling their children home. Names were whispered, Layla's, Yusef's, spoken in tones of familiarity that made the blood turn cold. Layla stiffened when she heard her father's voice, gentle and weary, as she remembered it from childhood. Layla, it called, just beyond the palms. My daughter, I am waiting. Come to me. Her lips trembled. Tears stung her eyes. It sounds so real, she whispered. Yusef tightened his grip on her hand. It isn't him. It's the host. Stay with me. But the pull was fierce, like an invisible rope around her chest. Every syllable of that voice seemed to drag her closer to the edge of the circle. She leaned forward before Yusef seized her shoulders. No! He hissed. You must not listen. Across from them, Farid sat unmoving, his gaze locked on the dark dunes. His mouth worked as though speaking prayers, but his voice was drowned beneath the clamor. Now Yusef heard it too. His brother's voice, broken but clear. Yusef, you left me in the river. Come, help me rise. The sound struck him like a blade. His breath faltered. His brother had drowned when Yusef was still a boy, his body swept downstream before help could come. He had buried the guilt deep, yet now it surfaced raw, undeniable. The voice beckoned from just beyond the palms. He lurched to his feet before Layla grabbed him. Don't! It isn't him! But the voice persisted, pleading, aching. His throat burned with the weight of his own sorrow. Farid suddenly slammed his staff against the sand, the sound cracking like thunder. Close your ears! He roared. They will take you if you give them your heart! The circle flickered faintly in the moonlight, as though holding back a tide unseen. The footsteps pressed closer, louder, and with them rose a smell of dust and sweat and iron, the stench of 1,000 men who had died with their armor on. Layla squeezed her eyes shut. She pressed her palms to her ears and began to hum, low, trembling, desperate. The sound grounded her, kept her within herself. She tugged Yusef down beside her, forcing him to kneel. Outside the circle, shadows gathered. For the first time, forms began to show, shifting outlines of men in helmets and tattered cloaks, their faces blurred, their eyes hollow as caves. Their mouths moved endlessly, whispering names, whispering promises. Farid's voice shook as he prayed, louder now, fighting against the tide. The staff shook in his hands. They will test you! Do not yield! Layla's humming grew stronger, a trembling melody that wove with Farid's prayer. Yusef's hands trembled, his body swaying between belief and despair. He could still hear his brother, so close, so broken. The host pressed closer, their forms blotting out the horizon, the circle glowing weakly against their weight. And then, one shadow stepped forward, clearer than the rest. It looked straight at Yusef. And it smiled. The breaking of the circle. The shadow's smile was thin, almost kind. Its face seemed to blur and sharpen with each breath, shifting between emptiness and the unmistakable features of Yusef's brother. Brother, it said, and though the voice was no more than a whisper, it filled the air like thunder. Why do you turn away? You swore to protect me. You swore you would not let me drown. And yet you let the river take me. Yusef's throat locked. His hands shook violently. He wanted to cry out, to confess, to throw himself into the darkness and beg forgiveness. Every wound he had carried for years cracked open under that voice. Layla seized his hand. It isn't him, she shouted. Her voice trembled, but it cut through the rising din. It's only the desert wearing his face. But the shadow stepped closer, pressing against the boundary of the glowing circle. The line of light quivered where its feet touched, as if straining against a great weight. All around them, the host surged forward, their whispers sharpening into cries, some coaxing, some condemning, some weeping. Farid lifted his staff high. His voice was hoarse now, the words of his prayer raw and desperate. Sweat dripped from his brow, but he did not falter. Do not heed them, he roared. They are the hollow shells of longing. They are hunger without flesh. The host shrieked as though the words had struck them. The air itself seemed to tear. Shadows pressed harder, and the circle's glow flickered. Yusef dropped to his knees. His brother's face lingered, so close, so accusing. His body leaned forward unconsciously, his hand stretching toward the edge. Yusef! Layla's cry was a whip crack in the night. She pulled him back with all her strength. Her voice broke, filled with all the love and fear she had left to give. Stay with me! I am here. Not him. Me! Her words struck him deeper than the whispers. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the tears streaming down her face, the tremble in her lips, the desperate truth in her eyes. She was alive. She was flesh. She was now. With a shuddering cry, he tore his gaze from the shadow. His hand dropped. He clung to Layla, burying his face in her shoulder as if she were the last anchor in the world. The host screamed. It was not a human sound, but the wail of wind tearing through the bones of the earth. Shadows lunged, but the circle flared brilliant white, brighter than the moon. Farid thrust his staff into the sand, and light burst outward in a wave. The grove shook. The palms bent as though in a storm. The host recoiled, dissolving like smoke, their cries scattering into the air. The shadow of Yusef's brother melted into nothing, leaving only silence. The desert grew still. Only the three of them remained, huddled within the circle, trembling in the aftermath of the storm. The glow faded, leaving only pale moonlight and the steady shimmer of the oasis. Farid's shoulders sagged. He leaned heavily on his staff, his chest heaving. "It is done," he whispered. His voice was dry, fragile. "For this night, at least. They will not take you." Layla held Yusef close. His body shook, but he was alive, his breath warm against her neck. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his head. His eyes were red but clear. "I almost went with them," he said, his voice raw. "I almost believed." "You stayed," Layla said firmly, brushing a tear from his cheek. "That is what matters." The desert around them lay hushed, as if it too had been listening. The stars burned steady, silent witnesses to all that had passed. For the first time in what felt like ages, there were no whispers in the sand. Epilogue: The desert remembers, the desert forgets. When dawn broke over the dunes, it came quietly. No fanfare, no grand gesture, only the slow gilding of sand, the subtle warmth creeping into the air, and the long shadows of palms reaching across the oasis. The three of them rose wearily. None spoke at first. Their bodies felt emptied, not just of fear, but of something heavier, like clay jars from which the last drop of water had been poured. The grove looked unchanged, as if the night had been nothing more than a dream. The palms swayed softly. The spring bubbled. The sand lay smooth and golden. Yet Yusef, Layla, and Farid knew the silence now carried weight. A silence hard won. "Will they come again?" Yusef asked at last, his voice hoarse. Farid gazed at the horizon, where the desert met the sky in its endless embrace. "Always," he said. "The desert keeps what is given to it. And sometimes it gives those things back, not as they were, but as echoes. But you know the sound of their whisper now. You need not listen." Layla reached for her brother's hand. He took it without hesitation, his grip steady, alive. She smiled faintly, though her eyes still carried the shadows of what they had seen. "We will walk forward," she said. "Not back into them." And so they left the oasis behind, their footprints trailing across the sand until the wind claimed them. The desert, eternal and vast, sighed around them. For centuries it had held the voices of lost armies, the unburied and the unremembered. And for centuries more it would keep them, weaving them into the shifting dunes, the restless storms, the endless silence. Yet somewhere, beneath the endlessness, a truth lingered like a buried ember. Not every whisper was meant to bind, and not every shadow could claim the living. The desert remembers. The desert forgets. And those who walk across it are caught, just for a moment, between its two breaths.